They told me my name was heavy with history, but when my father spat the word waste, it felt lighter than air ready to be erased. The October wind scratched the windows as if it wanted a seat at the table. Fingernails of cold testing the seal around the panes. Oak paneling trapped the light of the chandeliers in honeyed squares. The silver was old, the napkin stiff with starch, the kind of evening that came with rules. Diane had placed sprigs of rosemary in the candle rings because that's what the magazines said to do in autumn. The house smelled civilized. My father's voice made it otherwise. He carved into his steak with a soldier's precision. Real work, he said, as if continuing a conversation no one else could hear. Not the kind that hides behind Latin words and journal paywalls. Andrew laughed the way a well-fed dog barks, friendly, performative, eager to please. She's got 3 of those things now, Dad. You have to admit that's something. His grin said he didn't think it was not really. Diane reached for a basket of rolls that didn't need moving and moved them anyway. Let's talk about the wedding rehearsal, she offered. Her glance flicked toward me and away again, a courtesy blink. Uncle Peter swirled his wine wearing a cheerful expression that never seemed to touch his eyes. They ever give out medals for those letters, he asked me, harmless tone blade underneath. Or is it more like certificates? I looked at my plate. They give you access to build things you can't explain at a dinner table. Access, Peter repeated, savoring the word. Speaking of, I read a piece about new encrypted drives, the kind you can toss off a balcony, and they still hold up. What were they called? His eyebrows tilted toward me like fishing rods casting a line. My father didn't wait for my answer. Ivory tower nonsense, he announced, cutting through Diane's attempt at weather talk. 3 PhDs to hide the fact you don't know how to put a fence post in straight, or run a payroll, or fix a leaky valve. The fork in my hand felt heavier than it should. I'd had practice at this, at vanishing along the seams of a room until people stopped tripping over me, at leaving no edges he could catch. But the word he chose had aim. Waste, he said, and the sound seemed to dull the knives on the table. Autumn used to mean science fairs and graphite on my fingers' poster boards leaning against my bedroom wall. In 10th grade, I brought home my first paper, nothing important, a local competition, a graph like a flight path, and an argument I was too proud of. He set it down beneath a sweating glass. Later, I peeled the paper off in ragged spirals, the rings of water blurring the axis labels, the ink making tears on my hands that wouldn't wash off. I told myself it was a lesson, don't bring your work to the L. Dad, Andrew said, chuckling. Amelia's fine. She consults. Right meals government stuff. Peter's glass paused midair. Government, huh? Do they give you gear? Like those little, what are they? Thumb drives. The ones with the keypad on them. His smile widened, curious as a cat at a cupboard. I told myself silence could protect me, but silence had just signed my sentence. The night before the rehearsal, my phone rang. It wasn't the voice I feared, but the silence after it. November 10th, 2023, Washington, D.C. Neon and bus exhaust rose from the street. Inside my apartment was a small landslide of journals, flagged pages, cables coiled like snakes. I was pruning a paragraph when the phone jittered across the desk, my father's name flashing like a hazard light. I let it ring twice. Habit made me answer on the third. You're coming to Vanessa's rehearsal, he said. Not a question. And you won't make a scene. A dry laugh escaped, more defense than humor. What would a scene look like, Dad? Me standing quietly, existing. Don't be clever. It's unbecoming. Papers rustled on his end. I pictured the gunmetal desk, the certificates he respected because no professor had signed them. You're not going to embarrass me. Not with your habits. Your ideas. My ideas keep people alive, I said, placing the words carefully so they wouldn't spill. Real-world achievements, he replied, letting the phrase fall like a brick. Things a man can hold. Contracts. Acreage. Revenue. Your brother understands. You. You collect words. I stood and paced between the whiteboard and the window, barefoot on the rug I'd bought the week I left for grad school. Sirens swam by. Someone laughed in the hall. You invited me, I said. You could have not. I informed you, he corrected. There's a difference. And before you try to argue, let me be clear, just behave. That's all you're good for. He didn't shout. He never needed to. He let words occupy the rooms love should have furnished, then waited for them to harden. The line went quiet. For a moment I listened to it breathe, as if silence itself were delivering orders. I set the phone down and watched the screen go black, a small door closing. I opened the top drawer to check on the encrypted drive I traveled, with the one no cloud was allowed to touch. Ritual confirmed the casing, the keypad, the logbook entry. Receipts, a spare charger, a coil of rubber bands. Felt, then air. I pulled the drawer out and sifted everything onto the desk. Receipts, charger, bands. No drive. The apartment tilted. I searched the gaps beneath the desk, the heater's mouth, the shadow behind the bin. Coats, bags, the conference tote from Denver. Faster than rougher, as if speed could bully an object into reappearing. A memory clicked into place 2 days ago, groceries in my arms, Peter lingering by the car while I ran a ripped paper sack upstairs, his easy whistle, his hand drumming the edge of my briefcase. I'd left the keys on the console to free my hands. He'd said he'd lock up. I'd thanked him because that's what you do when family hovers. I checked the second drawer, the decoy drive was there, smooth and useless, the wrong weight. The real one had a nick along the edge from a loading dock in Norfolk, a scar I could find blindfolded. My fingers met, only felt. Outside, a bus sighed to a stop. In the wall, the elevator cables hummed. I sat and made myself breathe to 8, then drew 2 columns on a legal pad, misplaced and stolen. Under misplaced, I wrote drawers, bag, car, office. Under stolen, I wrote one name and underlined it twice. I didn't want to be a person who suspects. I had become a person who documents. I took the car fob from the bowl by the door and stood there a full minute, the plastic biting my palm, waiting for denial to present a better theory. None arrived. My father's words still lived in the room, arranging the furniture to his liking. Behave. Don't embarrass me. Don't exist too brightly. I set the fob back down and opened the drawer one more time, as if the object might have materialized out of obedience to ritual. Felt. Receipts. Rubber bands. Air. I checked the drawer again. The drive was gone, and with it, my proof of worth. They raised glasses to the future mine they shattered before it even began. November 17th, 2023. Loudon Ridge Country Club rehearsed its gleam. Mahogany railings breathed dark gloss chandeliers, mapped constellations in every glass. Servers drifted like commas through sentences of gossip. Laughter skimmed surfaces. The place cards arranged more than names. They arranged loyalties. Charles crowned the head of the table, Andrew to his right, Diane opposite Uncle Peter, orbiting near me as if proximity could pass for kinship. I set my clutch by the charger plate, and by reflex touched the seam of its inner pocket, felt lining the shape of absence humming. The drive's vacancy pressed a negative into my ribs. Family. My father announced, rising with a glass held at an angle that demanded obedience from light. We've gathered for a union built on substance, on commitment, on work. Around him, heads nodded as if the word were a sacrament. Andrew smiled at the applause he knew was coming, the future already fitted to his shoulders like a tailored jacket. Andrew Charles continued, You've turned sweat into something you can hold. Contracts signed, warehouses humming, paychecks on time. He lifted his glass higher. This is what it means when a life matters. Hands met hands, rings clicked. Approval traveled the linen like a fuse. I kept my palms on my napkin, smoothing a crease that didn't exist. Diane's smile tried for evenness and found its edge. To kindness, too, she offered a life preserver thrown toward a daughter she could not touch without tipping the boat. My father let kindness sink. To solidity, he said granite over water. During the swell of clapping, Peter leaned toward me, breath warm with Cabernet. Saw a piece on encrypted drives, he murmured eyes on the calla lilies as if speaking to flowers. Rugged ones. Folks think they're safer than they are. Unsafe in the wrong hands. In the wrong hands, anything, as I said. My voice felt like a vein under skin. Sure, he went on, casual, tightened to a wire. But I mean unsafe with the wrong owner. People misplace things. The word misplace landed like a tap on glass light, testing for fractures. My father's voice climbed the room again, pitched to reach the furthest corners. He enumerated Andrew's achievements by the measurable reduced errors, expanded roots, the kind of verbs that deposit into bank accounts. Guests applauded on cue. The pianist modulated into something festive. At my end of the table, questions traveled around me as if I were a coat rack. You don't toast the furniture. Names that mattered were set into microphones of attention. Mine dimmed in the chandeliers. Peter's shoulder brushed mine, a conspirator without a cause. Crazy market for data, he said into the noise. People will pay for shortcuts. But shortcuts cut the wrong thing. Is that advice? I asked, turning only enough to meet his reflection in the glass. Perspective, he said, patting his napkin as though checking its edges. Wouldn't want you caught holding something you can't explain at a dinner table. Forks paused. Glasses tipped back to attention. The pianist let his chord hang like a held breath. Charles rose again, not because the moment required it, but because he likes the machinery of rooms the way silence can be arranged, and people lean toward gravity. He angled his body to bring me into scope. It was not inclusion. It was aim. If you'll indulge me, he said, gracious as a gate when it swings shut. There's confusion. I felt the heat rise not from wine, but from the quiet verdict carved into crystal. Humiliation teaches silence. Pain teaches strategy. That night, I chose the wrong teacher. The ballroom had exhaled its crowd. What remained were abandoned napkins, overturned chairs, and the ghost of laughter clinging to the chandeliers. Servers wheeled carts into the shadows, their motions silent as though ashamed to witness what was left. I stood near the mahogany bar, the stem of my glass sweating into my palm, replaying the toasts I had endured. My name had not been raised but trampled, pressed under the clink of crystal. Yet rage has a way of fermenting fast. By the time the last pair of heels clicked out the door, I felt the weight of words unsaid burning at the back of my throat. I would not walk away again. Charles lingered, surveying the hall as if it were a campaign he had conquered. His tie was loosened jacket draped over a chair. Victory made him casual. Uncle Peter hovered nearby, unbuttoned vest and restless fingers tracing the lip of a brandy glass. He looked at me with half a smile, half warning, half apology, then looked away. I stepped forward, voice thin but steady. Where's my drive, Father? His head turned slow and deliberate like a predator humored by prey showing its teeth. Drive, he echoed, stretching the syllable until it sounded ridiculous. You think a box of numbers matters here? You think science feeds families? Men feed families. I clenched my hand around the glass so tightly I feared it would shatter. That drive holds 10 years of my work. You don't get to decide its worth. Give it back. Peter shifted, half rising from his chair as though to calm the fire. Maybe this isn't the place, he said softly. His eyes slid sideways, refusing to meet mine, trained instead on the patterned carpet. This is exactly the place, I shot back, voice rising, echoing against the empty hall. You humiliated me in front of everyone tonight. You stole what's mine. I want it back. Charles's laugh rumbled low and cutting. He leaned back, balancing on the edge of the table as if to show just how unshaken he was. 10 years, 3 PhDs, and you've got nothing to show but a tantrum. Threats. Try me. Court won't listen to a child clutching theories no one reads. My breath came fast, but the words refused to stall. If you don't return it, I'll file charges. Theft, tampering, fraud if I have to. I'm not powerless. He straightened features sharp under the dimmed chandeliers. In one swift motion, he swept my research folder from the table. Pages fanned into the air like startled birds before tumbling across the floor. Equations, annotated graphs, half-finished hypotheses scattered at his feet. His hand pressed down on the table, sealing the act like a verdict. "There's your power," he said. "Pick it up." Peter flinched, lips parting as if to intervene, but he swallowed whatever words had risen. The brandy glass trembled in his hand, amber trembling with it. I dropped to my knees, fingers trembling as they scrambled for each page, smoothing edges already bent. The carpet fibers pressed into my skin. Humiliation pressed deeper. My hair fell forward, shielding my face, though the shield was worthless. I felt their eyes anyway, one cold with disdain, the other hollow with cowardice. I gathered the scraps, heart hammering with every rustle of paper. Somewhere in the silence, I heard my own breath, ragged but alive. And then, quietly in the folds of that moment, came the vow I had bitten back too many times. As I knelt to gather the scraps, I swore the silence would one day answer him. One word turned my father to stone, and the room with him. November 21st, 2023. Loudon Ridge Country Club traded hush for black tie brightness. Chandeliers scattered coins of light across linen. I sat at the far end, distance measured not in feet but permissions. Diane smoothed a place card without meeting my eyes. Andrew laughed too easily. Uncle Peter grinned like a doorman to other people's fortunes. Charles held court. Andrew's ventures have teeth, he told a banker. Real trucks, real workers, real numbers. Then louder. Some of us build, some of us theorize. Laughter skimmed the crystal. Courses marched in precise formation. I counted my breaths, willing my name to be uninteresting. Dress grays appeared without fanfare. A single star caught the chandelier. General Robert Hayes moved the way certainty moves, without hurry or apology. He drifted toward our end as if the seating chart had been quietly revised. His gaze crossed mine and paused, recognizing rather than weighing. "Dr. Grant?" he asked, voice pitched to land without bruise. Charles chuckled. "General, that's family humor. She collects degrees the way some folks collect stamps. Brilliant, yes. Useful." He tipped his wrist as if weighing smoke. "Just theories. General, nothing real." The old instinct tightened my shoulders. Fold, disappear. Let the moment pass. Hayes did not look away. He carried the stillness of a man who knows silence isn't empty but charged. He waited until attention tilted of its own accord. "Doctor," he said. The word traveled the tablecloth as if it had rails. The pianist let a chord hang. A server froze with a tray aloft. A glass settled halfway, then didn't. Diane's fingers searched for water and closed on air. Andrew's smile stalled. Peter's swallow became a cough. Hayes inclined his head not to my father, but to me. "Your work has crossed my desk more than you think," he said, almost private. "It keeps people where they belong, alive." Heat rose in my face, not shame now, but circulation returning to a limb I had pretended I didn't need. Charles tried to recover. "Of course," he said, tightening his mouth into a grin. "We're all proud." The smile snagged on its own hook. Power likes monologues. Tonight it learned to share a stage. Conversation restarted in fragments, but the current ran against his oars. Guests approached Hayes with questions measured by consequence. A councilman asked about deployments. A consultant said my name carefully, as if it suddenly required a different mouth. Near my elbow, a small hand sticky with dessert tugged my sleeve. Aunt Amelia Bella whispered, "Is science allowed at fancy places?" "It belongs wherever breath does," I told her, watching the sentence settle like a promise. "We'll build something small that learns the sky." Hayes tasted his coffee and set the cup down with economy. He did not perform. He didn't need to. The room had learned a new formation. Charles lifted his chin, assembling a retort, any tool to return the furniture to his liking. Words gathered and failed. A first crack opened, not loud but clean. I did not adjust my voice or my posture. My name no longer felt like a room I had to dim to fit inside. It felt like a life with doors. Bella leaned closer. "If I learn your codes," she said, "can we build a flying thing?" "When you're ready," I said. "We'll start with pieces that look like nothing until they're everything." Hayes's star held steady. My father's smirk faltered. The old map that kept me in the margins curled at the edges. The pianist found the key again, softer, as if the instrument had learned gentler etiquette. No one needed prompting to adjust their posture. The evening had discovered a new center. Slowly, sure, I had not spoken, but one word had spoken for me. Truth doesn't hide it, waits collecting dust until someone dares brush it off. Late November 2023, the university library lay under siege by wind and rain. Storm water ran in sheets down the tall Gothic windows, streaking shadows across the oak floor. Inside, the archive hall smelled of paper older than my father's war medals. I sat hunched over a terminal light blue from the monitor, splashing over stacked journals, searching for a pattern that would not lie. Hayes's single-word doctor still echoed in me like a bell, but validation without proof was a candle in the storm. If Peter had stolen my drive, the trail had to be here, buried where time kept poor watch. The system chirped as I scrolled through the access logs. Lines of code looked ordinary, but ordinary only deceives the untrained eye. At 2:47 a.m., 4 nights earlier, my encrypted archive had been entered remotely. The IP address traced back to an unregistered node, one that mirrored the shell companies my uncle favored in investments. I whispered the sequence under my breath, my pulse quickening not at discovery, but at confirmation. Betrayal wore familiar shoes. A soft shuffle made me freeze. Between shelves of bound dissertations, a small face appeared, Bella. Her hair was damp from the storm, cheeks pink with effort. "I followed you," she whispered, clutching her backpack. "Mom thinks I'm asleep, but I believe you." Her eyes glimmered not with fear but with determination far too large for a girl her age. "Bella, you shouldn't be here," I said, glancing toward the circulation desk where the night librarian dozed. "This isn't safe." "You're looking for the missing pieces," she said simply. "I can help. I know how to find things." She held up a tablet, its screen glowing with search windows. My chest tightened, not with dread, but with the weight of being seen. Together we dug. I traced anomalies in my research backups while Bella hunted metadata with childlike persistence. What I thought would take hours, she narrowed in minutes. Time-stamped shadow copies that hadn't been erased. "Here," she said, pointing. The files bore access tags not from me, but from a proxy tied to Ridgefront Analytics, a name I recognized too well. Uncle Peter had wrapped my work in a shell company laundering discovery into profit. My discovery. My name. The storm rattled harder. Somewhere behind us, a stack of returned materials waited to be reshelved. Bella tugged one box closer. "Maybe he slipped something back," she murmured. I half smiled at her persistence, but when I lifted the lid, my breath caught. Nestled between journals was a small flash drive, black casing scuffed a strip of masking tape across it. On the tape, in Peter's quick, careless handwriting, the single word, "drafts." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Electricity coursed through me, not the power of theory, but of tangible evidence. The weight was small, but its meaning pressed like granite. Every humiliation, every dismissal suddenly had edges I could cut back with. Bella looked at me, waiting. The librarian stirred, adjusting his glasses, oblivious to the storm inside our table. I closed my fist around the drive, the plastic warming against my palm. At last, betrayal had left fingerprints. At last, silence could be broken not by voice, but by proof. I held the stolen fragment in my hand, proof he had touched what was mine. In a room built for applause, I planted a whisper sharp enough to cut. The Georgetown ballroom glittered that December evening, its chandeliers dripping with light as if to convince the world that truth could be hidden beneath crystal. Velvet gowns swirled, champagne flutes tilted, and polished laughter ricocheted from marble to mirror. My father thrived here among those who measured worth not in integrity, but in portfolio size. Tonight, though, I had brought something sharper than their flattery, a fragment of proof hidden in memory and, on a single flash drive, I would not yet reveal. Charles stood at the center of it, all back straight as if still on parade, one hand guiding the crowd's attention like a conductor. He bragged of Andrew's Innovation Fund, a venture he claimed would revolutionize the field of applied analytics. Applause followed dutifully, champagne glasses rising like a ritual. I sat half a step removed, the dutiful daughter who existed only in shadow, but inside me, the storm from the archives still rumbled. This time, silence would not be my sentence. It would be my weapon. I waited for the laughter to crest, then leaned forward. My voice slipped between clinks of glass like a scalpel. Andrew's fund sounds fascinating, I said evenly. I'm curious, what data sources are you using to fuel such rapid growth? The words seemed harmless, just academic curiosity, but Peter, standing beside Charles with his habitual half-smile, faltered. His glass jerked, champagne froth nearly spilling over the rim. A beat of silence followed, too brief for most, but to me, it was thunder. Charles barked a laugh. Always the scientist, Amelia, never satisfied with the headline, always digging for footnotes. His attempt at dismissal drew polite chuckles, yet eyes had shifted. Not to him, but to Peter, whose knuckles whitened on the stem of his glass. I caught Bella's gaze across the room, wide-eyed, perched behind Diane's careful posture. She understood even if she couldn't name it yet. The whisper had landed. Peter cleared his throat too quickly. Data sources. Really, Amelia? As if you'd understand the structure of encryption protocols? He stopped, realizing the slip even as the words escaped. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Why mention encryption if this was merely about investment? My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression calm, lips curved in the faintest smile. You're right, I replied, voice low but carrying. I wouldn't know what to do with encryption, unless of course someone had already handled it for me. The chandeliers caught the tension, refracting it into hard edges. Charles tried to redirect with another toast, but too late, the current had shifted. Questions hung in the air, heavier than the perfume, sharper than the violins. Peter's jaw tightened, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the panic underneath. His eyes darted toward me, then away, like a man realizing he had bled in a pool of sharks. I sipped from my glass, letting the silence stretch. It was not yet the strike, not yet exposure, but a needle can wound long before a blade. And tonight, the wound was visible. The look on his face told me the needle had drawn blood. They built walls of contracts and clauses. I built corridors of questions. Mid-December arrived with the sharpness of winter and the false cheer of wreaths hanging on downtown doors. The law office we rented smelled of toner and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights humming like a warning. It wasn't prestige, but it was a battlefield. Across the scratched conference table, my pro bono attorney loosened his tie and clicked his pen. Start with what can be proved, he said. His voice was stripped of sympathy, sharpened by process. Bella sat beside me, feet swinging above the floor, her attention taut. I placed my fragments of proof between us like offerings on an altar. I laid out the timestamps: 2:47 a.m., unauthorized access to my encrypted research drive. I described Ridgefront Analytics, a shell company cobbled together with Peter's usual sloppiness. I showed him the flash drive returned in library materials, Peter's handwriting scrawled on the label. Each detail was small, but together they traced a shadow of theft. They'll dismiss your outrage, the attorney said, but they can't dismiss logs and timestamps. His pen flew across the pad. We'll start with a preservation letter. A cease and desist for misappropriation and unauthorized access. We'll hash this drive for the record. You'll file an affidavit establishing custody. Do not underestimate what this paper means, Bella whispered. What's a hold notice? The attorney gave her a glance softened by patience. It's a command not to destroy what matters. If they do, it becomes a second crime. She nodded, her young face set with determination. Watching her, I felt the faintest warmth and echo of belief that didn't depend on titles. The printer spat out the letters, ink still smelling of heat. Each line of legalese felt like a blade. I signed my name slowly, aware that every letter was both shield and spear. We mailed the cease and desist to Ridgefront's registered agent by certified mail, another copy to my father's office. The envelopes disappeared into the postal system like charges slid into a chamber. On the cold sidewalk, Bella's scarf caught the wind like a pennant. Does this mean they have to stop? She asked. It means they'll have to pretend not to hear, I said. And pretense makes noise. That evening, the phone rang. My father's voice filled the voicemail, heavy with contempt. A letter. Amelia, builders don't send letters. They sign contracts. If this is your way of feeling useful, fine. Just don't embarrass yourself further. Remember who built the table you're trying to pound. He chuckled, a single knife of sound, and hung up. I saved the message without replaying it. My attorney only shrugged. Good. Pride leaves fingerprints. 2 days later, a padded envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a glittering holiday card, snowman smiling like an idiot. Between its folded hands lay my cease and desist letter, torn perfectly in half, unsigned. Glitter scattered across the gray table like shrapnel from mockery. Bella's jaw tightened. The attorney sealed it in an evidence sleeve. Receipt acknowledged, he said dryly. They only mock what frightens them. I stared at the fragments. They thought laughter dismissed me. They didn't understand laughter can be archived too. I filed the voicemail, the card, the glitter, every insult they had dressed as humor. Evidence is not always numbers. Sometimes it is arrogance caught in the act. The city outside blinked with Christmas lights, each string a circuit insisting on cheer. Inside, we built our own circuitry, deadlines, filings, questions that turned walls into corridors. I pressed new stamps, sealed fresh envelopes, and signed my name again, steady this time. I didn't need celebration. I needed progress. The torn letter gleamed inside its sleeve, daring me. I met its shimmer with silence and let that silence sharpen. The law had been laughed at, but laughter can echo like fear if timed right. Sometimes the fire that warms you is the same one that burns everything you built. Christmas Eve at Loudon Ridge wore its beauty like armor. Outside, the pines glittered with lights strung too perfectly, each bulb a jewel against the cold dark. Inside, the estate glowed with polished brass evergreen garlands and silver bowls of cranberries. It was all meant to feel timeless, but I felt time tighten like a noose. My place at the table was marked with crystal and porcelain, yet my presence was a blemish. Charles lifted his glass, his posture as rigid as a commander inspecting ranks. To family, he declared, voice heavy, and to accomplishments that speak for themselves. The room hummed with practiced approval. Then his gaze snapped toward me, sharp as glass breaking. And to Amelia, he added with a smirk that widened into cruelty, our disappointment of the year. Laughter scattered like broken ornaments across the hall. Diane bowed her head, adjusting her napkin. Andrew chuckled obediently. Peter's grin was sly, his hand heavy on the decanter. Only Bella stared at me, wide-eyed lips pressed into silence. I did not flinch, but my throat burned. The toast was not simply ridicule. It was judgment carved into tradition. My father had weaponized the season itself, turning ritual into trial. I lowered my glass, the champagne bubbling like a jeer in my hand. Later, while the house settled into carols and chatter, I slipped into the study. On the mahogany desk among holiday cards lay a plain envelope with no signature. My name was typed neatly on the front. Inside was a letter from the Journal of Applied Systems, the one publication where my article, The Culmination of Years, was pending. Their words sliced deeper than any toast after review. We must retract consideration of your submission due to significant overlap with prior work under external review. I knew instantly. Peter. He had planted sabotage, leaking fragments of my research into their pipeline, tainting my reputation. My proof of worth, my anchor, was now branded as derivative. The paper that should have carried my name into permanence was already ash in the mouths of strangers. The letter trembled in my hands. My father's laughter in the dining room was still echoing when Peter stepped into the doorway, eyes gleaming. "Rough news?" he asked, feigning sympathy. "Perhaps some things are best left to those who know how to protect them." He straightened his cufflinks, each click like a seal on betrayal. My response was silence, but silence filled with heat. I walked to the fireplace, its flames crackling beneath the weight of logs perfumed with cedar. Slowly, deliberately, I fed the rejection letter into the fire. The edges curled, black ink dissolving into smoke. The paper bent, collapsed, and fell into glowing fragments. I watched years of effort dissolve into flame, the same fire that warmed the room now burning what had defined me. My hands did not tremble as the last piece crumbled. Bella slipped beside me, small and certain. "Don't give up," she whispered, her voice cutting through the crackle. I turned toward her, and in her eyes I saw no mockery, no verdict, only belief. For a moment the silence around us shifted. It was no longer suffocation. It was a cocoon. I stared at the fireplace again. Among the ashes, a single ember glowed, stubbornly refusing to die. My chest tightened, not with despair, but with recognition. Ashes were not an ending. They were what remained after fire proved itself. I leaned closer, the heat painting my face, and allowed myself to believe what the ember suggested: ruin could also be seed. The night pressed on with laughter from the dining hall, the sounds of triumph staged by those who thought the story was finished. But in the hearth, the ember still glowed. I thought ashes meant an ending until I saw the ember still glowing. Silence isn't empty, it holds secrets waiting for the right ear. December 31st, 2023. The university lab was shadow and hum, benches, wiped monitors asleep. Outside, fireworks rehearsed in the distance, low thuds shaking dust from the vents. I kept the door latched and the lights low. I trusted procedures more than holidays. Now. My phone lit with a text from Hayes. "Are you in a secure place?" I answered yes. "I have something you need to see." Minutes later, the hallway camera showed dress grays without fanfare. I opened the door. "Doctor," he said. Bella straightened from the stool where she'd been waiting with a thermos, trying to be invisible and failing wonderfully. Hayes nodded to her, then set a thick folder on the bench. "Short version," he said. "A flagged packet left your network the night your archive was breached. It bounced through Ridgefront's node into a contractor sandbox and knocked on a defense server. Someone tried to sell what wasn't theirs." "Peter," I said. He opened the folder. Chain of custody logs, hash values, timestamps, path histories, screenshots of the contractor portal, a purchase inquiry stub, a Ridgefront admin credential created 3 days after your drive went missing. The user string pointed to one of the names your uncle uses when he wants to look legitimate. Bella leaned closer, breath fogging the steel. "So they tried to buy Aunt Amelia's work." "They tried to take it," Hayes said, "to launder authorship through a vendor and call it innovation. The server refused the handshake. Our sensors didn't." I slid a printout under the task light. The hashes matched my local archive. The numbers carried the cool confidence of facts. Hayes placed a small ruggedized drive beside the papers. "Forensics copy," he said. "Air-gapped, right-blocked, sealed. Tomorrow it goes where subpoenas can find it." Glassware ticked. My hands did not shake. Months of insults had been megaphones pointed at a lie. The logs did not raise their voice. They didn't need to. I thought silence was a punishment, I said. It turns out it's also a vault. Hayes's mouth tugged. You waited. Now we move. Paper chain testimony. He'll claim ignorance. The logs won't. He handed me a pen. I signed. He countersigned strokes compact as orders. Bella watched the ink settle. Will they have to listen now, she asked. It means they don't get to choose, I said. She looked at the rugged drive as if it were an egg. Is that the key? It's the lock and the key, I told her. It proves what happened and stops them pretending it didn't. Hayes zipped the folder into a weatherproof pouch and checked the seal. Incident report at 0800, he said. Your counsel gets a copy. Keep devices off network except here. And Dr. Goodwork waiting. After he left, the lab felt larger, a wall slid back. I powered the imaging station and compared our hashes to my original's match. The contractor stub time-stamped 251, same night as the breach. The alert note red-barred the defense server's refusal. The attempt was clumsy, arrogant, the shape of my uncle's ambition rendered as metadata. Fireworks multiplied, campus bells counted toward midnight. Bella touched my sleeve. Can I tell my teacher you saved people? Tell her I kept a promise, I said, and that I had help. I gathered the copies into my binder. The quiet around us wasn't empty. Freezers hummed. Answers crowded the room. Under my hand lay evidence that would not wilt under cross-examination, my stolen research time-stamped, verifiable, undeniable. I closed the binder and felt the click move through my wrist like a key finding its notch. The year ended, not with fireworks, but with a silence that contained a key, and I was ready to turn it. They once told me I had no voice yet in this room. Even silence leaned in to listen. January scraped the sky clean. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cables snaking across the stone. Inside wood panels drank the noise until only procedure remained. I sat at the plaintiff's table and counted my breath the way divers do. My attorney laid out our lattice access logs, hash reports, chain of custody, the contractor portal stub, each page, a rung I could put my weight on. Hayes took a seat behind us, saying nothing, the quiet authority of a uniform folded into a pew. Across the aisle, my father performed his comfort chin-lifted tie, centered a smile that had always been strongest when I was smallest. Peter kept dabbing his forehead as if the room were warmer on his side. Andrew's shoulders were tense. Diane studied the seal above the bench to avoid studying me. The clerk called the case. We rose. My counsel opened with times that could not lie. 02, 47, 02, 51. Exhibit A, the archive's heartbeat as it was breached. Exhibit B, the imaging report, the hash match. Exhibit C, the defense server log that registered the knock. He spoke like someone building scaffolding, slow, load-bearing, nothing pretty that didn't have to be. When invited, Charles stood and aimed his certainty at the room. Your Honor, this is a collage of fantasies from a failed academic, he said, voice rich with derision. Technical doodles dressed up as proof. My family builds, she narrates. A ripple of laughter reached for permission and did not find it. I kept my eyes on Peter. The contractor stub appeared on the screen. The admin alias he favored glowed in a line that looked harmless until you knew how to read. He swallowed and missed. The judge asked about the hash process. Our forensic declarant explained in language even a camera could understand. Hayes's letter entered the record to explain why the defense log existed. He did not look back when heads turned toward him. He didn't need to. Objections rose and fell. Relevance Foundation overruled, overruled. The gallery exhaled. The mountain had a path. When it was my turn, I stood with my palms flat on varnish so I wouldn't clutch at anything. I gave the court the smallest version of myself that still held the truth the night the numbers shifted. The masking tape with a hand that was not mine. how a single word at a dinner table had taught me what silence could hold. I did not speak of childhood or holidays or the name I carried like stone. I spoke of logging leases, registered agents' invoices. The reporter's keys murmured a rain I had learned to welcome. Questions came. How do you know Ridgefront belongs to Mr. Carlyle? I traced the filings and payment routes. Could you be mistaken? I prefer proof to pride, I said before remembering to say no. A few jurors' pens paused and resumed as if my answer had been a metronome and not a line. The morning stretched thin. Through the glass slit in the doors, I saw tripods bloom and collapse strangers waiting to see which way the weather would turn. In the chamber, even silence leaned forward to hear whether numbers could speak. At last, the judge closed a folder, glanced at the clock, and spoke. The court finds the proffered exhibits facially credible. A deeper review is ordered under seal. The motion to strike is denied. It was not a celebration. It was the sound of steel being set where wood had been. Sound returned to the room like fabric shifting. I let out a breath I had been saving since October. My attorney squeezed a page straight that wasn't crooked. Hayes's chin dipped once, a salute to patience and paper. I risked a look at the defense table. Peter's linen square had given up. His jaw worked without a purpose. Andrew stared at his hands as if they'd just confessed. Diane's poise showed a hairline crack. Charles did not move. He held himself so still it looked like control, until you noticed it was fear pretending to be stone. He turned his head an inch, and our eyes met across the aisle. A shutter clicked, small thunder under oak. The record patient kept breathing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind my father's eyes. They polished their lies for years. I shattered them with one strike of truth. By the second week, the courtroom knew our names. Cameras weathered the steps. Inside, oak and order set the climate. I sat at the plaintiff's table and counted my breath like a diver. Hayes sat behind me, ballast. Across the aisle, Charles centered his tie as if symmetry were defense. Peter blotted a brow the air conditioning couldn't warm. Diane watched the seal. Andrew watched the door. My counsel began without flourish. Contract logs rose on the screen, dates, remittances, a Ridgefront credential entering a contractor portal. A purchase inquiry born the same night my archive was breached. A test upload whose hash matched my work. He didn't promise. He proved. Then he called Hayes. The oath sat plain in his mouth. He mapped the chain of custody like a drill alert capture copy hash seal store. No decoration, no gaps. The path ran one way. Peter leaned forward as if tide could be negotiated. On cross, he found a smile too bright. General, he said, innovation circulates ideas. Migrate families share. We were only... He reached for a softer word and grabbed the live wire. Protecting our legacy. Through reallocation. Pens paused. Heads lifted. My counsel didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Charles rose to posture the spillaway. Your Honor, he said, this is theatrical. My brother-in-law is a salesman, not a criminal. The emails you're about to see. He heard himself too late. The judge's eyebrow settled. Emails, my attorney asked, almost kind. Which emails, Mr. Grant? Communications, he said. Informal encouragements. Family business. The projector answered. Headers and dates filled oak. Make her work presentable. The board won't care whose name is on it if it ships. Quietly. No loose ends. Deadlines don't wait for dissertations. Move it. Routing traced back to Charles's office like prints in wet concrete. Objection, foundation, overruled, metadata enlarged, oxygen thinned. Hayes returned to confirm the forwarding path. The emails arrived attached to a contractor justification packet. Content redacted, headers kept for integrity. Procedure, not drama. Peter's composure buckled. You're twisting context, he blurted, then lunged toward safety and missed. We were aligning assets. She hides in papers. We bring them to market. His eyes sought Charles and found calculation, not rescue. My counsel walked the invoice's ridgefront billings to a holding company tied to the estate sums that mirrored the proposed consulting price for my models. This line item, legacy assurance, is that your phrase, Peter swallowed. A placeholder. For what? For not being left behind. Charles tried once more, varnish over rot. Families consolidate, he told jury. We were keeping her in-house. That's love. The projector offered another email. If she won't sign root around, you have my authorization. The signature block glowed with his favorite title. Calm arrived the way equations balance. For months, I'd been treated as vapor. Here was weight. Evidence didn't rage. It arranged. The judge admitted the full string. We stepped through until polite imaginations ran out of furniture. Peter's reallocation was a plan. Charles's encouragements were orders. Andrew slid lower as if gravity remembered him. Diane closed her eyes, a liturgy. I watched the screen like a mirror that finally reflected what the House refused to show. The record will reflect. The judge said that the exhibits link the disputed work to the defendant's accounts and directives. No gavel. None needed. The acknowledgement weighed more than wood. Sound returned in an inhale. A reporter shifted. My attorney straightened a page. Hayes remained a pillar disguised as a man. I looked to the defense table. Peter mouthed a prayer to a god he never served. Charles studied the map he had drawn and couldn't read. His jaw set, then loosened, searching for a story that would still obey him. There wasn't one. The posture that ruled rooms began to look like a brace for a fall. The gallery gasped, and in that sound I heard the walls of our empire collapse. Legacies don't burn slowly, they collapse like buildings struck at the foundation. Late January brought a gray light that never seemed to rise or fall. The estate on Loudon Ridge, once the stage for triumphs rehearsed in crystal and mahogany, now stood under siege from silence and cameras. Reporters camped at the gate. Satellite vans crowded the narrow road. Neighbors who once lined up for Charles's banquets drove by, slowly staring, waiting for headlines to bloom into gossip. Inside the house was no longer a monument. Federal agents moved through the halls, cataloging. Paintings were lifted from their hooks, frames wrapped in brown paper. Silverware was boxed. The vault of trophies, medals, certificates, plaques stood open, tagged for seizure. Each object once displayed as evidence of dominance became an exhibit in ruin. I walked past the agents and felt no victory, only an absence like oxygen pulled from a room. Charles sat in his study with the curtains drawn. The desk that had hosted contracts and decrees was ringed with empty glasses. He hunched over one more, his hand trembling not from age, but from the weight of defeat. This house was built on my back, he muttered when he saw me, and you've let them tear it apart. His eyes held fury, but behind it lay confusion, as though he still believed anger could stitch walls back together. I didn't answer. For once, silence wasn't defense but mirror. Peter was nowhere near defiant. Agents had pulled him into a side room for questioning. His voice carried down the corridor, desperate bargaining. I can give you Charles' emails, calls, all of it. Just reduce the charges. His words bled through the wood, pitiful, where once he had been oily and smug. When he emerged, his collar was damp with sweat, his face a map of collapse. He avoided Charles's gaze, shuffling toward the exit like a man already halfway erased. Diane lingered at the edges of rooms. She said little, but the quiet had changed, no longer protective, no longer complicit. Shame clung to her posture. She touched the edges of tables as if to steady herself, eyes tracing the bare spaces on the walls where portraits once hung. When she finally looked at me, there was no denial, only a recognition too late to matter. Andrew came last, awkward, stripped of the certainty that privilege had always afforded him. He approached me in the gallery where dust outlines marked the absence of paintings. "Amelia," he said, voice low. I should have spoken sooner. I thought siding with him meant strength, but all it did was make me weak. His regret felt real, though raw. I told him softly that truth doesn't erase betrayal, but it can build something after. He nodded relief mingling with grief. The climax came when agents returned to the study. Charles tried to rise, but his knees betrayed him. "You can't parade me like a criminal," he barked, but the handcuffs spoke louder than defiance. They walked him through the front doors where neighbors watched from sidewalks and cameras snapped like thunder. He kept his chin raised, but the angle couldn't hide the cracks. I stood in the shadowed hall watching through the glass. The man who had silenced me at every table, who had reduced 3 doctorates to nothing more than waste, now walked as a prisoner of his own choices. The house seemed to exhale as the door shut behind him. The man who once silenced me left in handcuffs, yet not a word escaped his lips. Justice doesn't erase scars, it teaches you how to carry them with steadier hands. The snow outside had thinned to slush, February sunlight stretching across Washington like a fragile promise. My townhouse, once cluttered with drafts and half-finished projects, smelled faintly of coffee and paper ink. I sat at my desk, pen balanced between fingers, journal open. For years I had written in secret scraps of thought, fragments of worth careful lines no one cared to read. This morning the words felt different. They were not desperate appeals to be heard. They were acknowledgments that I had been heard at last, even if silence had been the judge. Bella padded softly into the room, hair pulled into a loose braid, a mug too large for her small hands. She watched me scribble and then asked, almost shyly, "Do you ever regret it? Fighting them like that?" I looked up at her, her face still carrying the brightness of youth, but already shadowed by what she had seen these past months: betrayal, courts, handcuffs. "Not for truth," I said. "Regret belongs to those who hide." I fought because silence left me no choice. She nodded, setting her mug beside my papers, her fingers tracing the edges of a folder that now bore only my name. Later that morning, Andrew knocked on the door. His suit was wrinkled, his tie uneven, a far cry from the polished air our father had groomed. He stood in the doorway as though unsure if he deserved to enter. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of unspoken years. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I followed him because it was easier. I thought strength meant standing where power stood. I see now it was cowardice." I let him sit. His hands fidgeted, searching for absolution in the pattern of my rug. "We can't rebuild what was burned," I told him, "but we can decide not to strike matches again." He nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time I saw my brother not as rival or extension of our father, but as a man finally choosing his own path. The day moved gently. Papers I had once scattered in anger now lay in ordered stacks, drafts of articles, outlines of projects that carried my name. The court had restored ownership, but ownership was only a tool. What mattered was what I chose to do with it. When Hayes arrived that afternoon, the room seemed to straighten. He wore no uniform, only a simple coat against the chill, but his presence carried the weight of quiet authority. He didn't offer speeches or sympathy. Instead, he stood in my doorway, looked at me over the rim of his glasses, and said, "Only, doctor." Then he raised his hand, not in salute to a subordinate, but in recognition of an equal. I rose, acknowledging the gesture. For a moment, the silence between us held more dignity than applause ever could. Then he left as simply as he had come, his boots leaving faint impressions in the melting snow. That night I sat once more with my journal, the pages filled not with wounds, but with plans. I would publish not under the shadow of a family name, not through the voice of stolen hands, but as Amelia Grant. My research would breathe on its own. Truth stripped of theft would stand. I thought of scars then, how they remain even after healing, as reminders not of weakness, but of survival. I touched the ink on my fingers and smiled. I wasn't waiting for applause anymore, only for the quiet that comes with peace. They once erased me with silence. Now silence became the proof I had won. February set a bright, cold blade across the courthouse steps. Reporters packed the barricades, microphones blooming like a hedge that had learned to shout. We came out into winter air that judged without speaking. Behind us, the sentence had landed guilty on the counts that mattered. Assets frozen, injunctions permanent. The gavel's tap was a small door closing. No cheering. Justice keeps its own volume. Charles hit the light, first jaw clenched as if a muscle could prop a house. Cameras chased his face for a story that no longer answered. Peter followed, thinner than December, cuffed in posture. Diane hung back, coat the color of retreat. Andrew walked beside her, learning how to carry silence. The press swung toward me. Dr. Grant comment, "Do you forgive them? Are you satisfied?" Words piled and called it urgency. Years ago, I might have translated myself into their dialect. Now I knew noise is a costume truth wears to pass through a crowd. Bella found my sleeve, small fingers steady. Up the steps, Hayes stood in a plain coat enough. Days earlier, he had pressed a challenge coin into my palm, not a medal, he'd said, only acknowledgement that some work refuses a stage. I kept it close through closing arguments and slept with it on the night table like a witness that never slept. A headline snapped on a kiosk, "Trial ends, legacy on ice." Paper hammered, then stilled. A voice called my name as if the syllables were his. I descended to the barrier. Habit rose. Explain, defend, apologize for taking up space. I let habit pass. I drew the coin from my coat and lifted it just high enough for the lenses to understand. No speech. An open hand. The winter sun held steady bright as verdict. Lenses blinked. The sound changed. It didn't die. It leaned. A young reporter lowered her mic. "Doctor," she said, finishing a thought she heard. The crowd registered the gap where a quote should be and felt its weight. Even the tripods adjusted. Charles paused at the curb, tugged by a wire he could no longer see. Peter stared at the pavement like weather he hadn't packed for. Diane's gaze drifted to Bella. Relief loosened her face, the tired kind when a lie runs out of breath. I thought of the first dinner crystal carrying a verdict across linen and the rehearsal when a single word split a room. We had mistaken volume for proof. Today, truth reduced. Paper worked. Numbers kept their promise. The rest could be quiet. "Dr. Grant," someone tried again, gentler. "What would you tell girls watching this?" Bella squeezed once. I turned my palm so the coin caught light, then slid it back into the pocket where warmth had begun to gather. The gesture traveled further than a paragraph. Headlines would harden by dusk, some wrong, some grafting drama where gravity had already ruled. There was work without microphones, drafts to finish a class, to answer a niece who wanted to build something that listened before it flew. I read patience carved in stone. When the door closed on my father, no one clapped. When Peter entered the next car, a siren tested its voice and swallowed it. The crowd shifted but did not swell. I didn't bow or wave. I let the quiet stand at my back like a wall poured to code. A photographer caught the frame and didn't ask for a redo. Space did the speaking. Questions thinned until the city breathed a dry leaf across stone, a bus exhaling at the corner. Beside me, Bella smiled the way new engineers do when the test holds. We stepped from the stairs to the sidewalk, not away from the fight, but through it toward a morning that had been waiting since the night he called my life a waste. My story didn't end with applause. It ended with silence. And silence was enough. I stood on those courthouse steps with nothing but silence in my hand, and yet it spoke louder than all their years of ridicule. To those of you reading my story, I ask you to see me not only as someone who endured, but as someone who chose dignity over noise. Leave me your thoughts, your reflections. Tell me if you too have felt erased and found your own way back into the light. And take this with you: never underestimate the strength of quiet conviction. Truth does not need applause. It needs courage patience, and the will to endure.